Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Next Gen. The future of college basketball is here, and the next generation is ready to leave their mark. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Smith, and in this week's edition of Next Gen, I'm joined by Indiana basketball insider Cruz. Cruz, thank you so much for joining us this week. And without further ado, let's get into this week's Next Gen player to watch. That's going to be 6'9", forward from Indiana University, Trayce Jackson Davis. Was a man amongst boys in high school. Tell our viewers how he got to where he is now.
Well, for anybody who follows Indiana high school basketball, Trayce Jackson Davis was a guy who was on the radar of a bunch of people, including Purdue fans and Indiana fans, of course. But you also had guys like Armand Franklin, Romeo Langford, and Rob Finney also in the mix at Indiana. So he was just one name of a bunch of guys from Indiana who started to come back to the university to play college basketball, because for a period of time, there wasn't a whole lot of guys from the state of Indiana going to Indiana. So there was a big emphasis on getting two guys, Romeo Langford and Trayce Jackson Davis. Indiana was able to land them both. I saw this interesting stat from scholarshipstats.com. Under 1% of high school basketball players will play in Division I college basketball. And out of that giant field, he was one of those guys. But why was that? Well, I guess simply, he's bigger than a lot of guys. I mean, in the state of Indiana, you and I both know there's not a whole lot of height to go around. You'll play a tall guy every once in a while, but for the most part, he's playing against guys who are way smaller than him. Now, in college and in the NBA, that's a little bit different. But you take that size and you combine it with speed, skill, and footwork, you get a guy like Trayce Jackson Davis. And now you take a look at the skill set. He's going around smaller guys who are much quicker than himself. He has a layup package that you usually see with guards where he's able to kind of adjust in midair, with a defender in front of him and whatnot. He has explosive athleticism. He always jumps like he's trying to dunk on somebody and put him on a poster every single time. And you compound that athleticism with timing, and you get one of the best shot blockers in the country.
He's a 4-star recruit out of Greenwood, Indiana, with Center Grove High School. And he was recruited, like you said, by a bunch of different schools, especially in the state of Indiana. Of course, was recruited by Indiana, ended up going there. Recruited by Purdue, Butler, Ohio State, even a future Big Ten team in UCLA, turned that down to go to the Indiana Hoosiers. And those first two seasons with Trayce Jackson Davis in Indiana during his freshman and sophomore year, they were a bit odd, especially that first year where he actually had a true center in Joey Brunk. But of course, this was under Archie Miller. What were those first 2 years like with Trayce Jackson Davis?
Well, it was a little bit rough. I mean, as most Hoosier fans know, the Archie Miller years, especially the latter 2 years, were a little bit rough. Trayce Jackson Davis was a glimmer of hope during those times. And I mean, you take a look at Archie's third year in the 1920 season. It would have been great if it hadn't been for COVID, but the team was really depleted, especially the year after the fact that they had an NCAA tournament bid taken away from them. And then Trayce Jackson Davis really had to take in the load in his sophomore year. I mean, he was really trying to carry that team because he didn't really have a whole lot of help around him. So he tried to take that leadership role. It might have been a little bit too much for him. Indiana had a really down year that season, Archie's last season. You bring in a guy like Mike Woodson, who also brings in transfers like Xavier Johnson and Miller Kopp into the program. And look at that, he has a whole lot of help. And guess what? Indiana gets a heck of a lot better last season. And now you bring in a guy like Jalen Hood-Schifino, who only lessens that burden on Trayce Jackson Davis this season. Compound that with the fact that Indiana got a taste of success last season. It's going to be a heck of a year, especially for Trayce Jackson Davis, who's the heart and soul of this team.
And not just the point totals stand out to you from Trayce Jackson Davis, it's the assist totals as well. They've continuously risen every single year, and now this year with the Hoosiers, he's at nearly 2 assists per game. That's really because teams have honed in on him and double-teamed him. Like you said, during that Rutgers game, saw nearly triple teams thrown at him, and Rutgers did a really good job at their rotations. But looking at Trayce Jackson Davis's game, really slowing everything down and watching how he's been able to evolve his game, what has he really been working on?
Just playmaking ability, to be completely honest with you. I mean, everyone's always working on scoring, but what the offense or what the defense gives you is what he's going to do. So, I mean, you take a look at guys like Xavier Johnson and Jalen Hood-Schifino once again. Grace Thompson even sometimes can step out and shoot a little bit. When you have guys who can spread the floor, it makes it that much more difficult, because if you want to go all in and attack on Trayce Jackson Davis, you have to worry about the long closeout to the guys on the perimeter who can knock down shots, but also guys like Xavier Johnson and Jalen Hood-Schifino can beat you off the dribble, which makes it just that much more difficult. You have to make a decision. You have to pick your poison. Do you want to leave Trayce Jackson Davis one-on-one in the post, or would you rather give up three-pointers out on the perimeter with a long closeout? It's a decision that teams are going to have to make against Indiana. It's a decision I know that teams do not want to make, but it's a decision that they have to make.
And I have a feeling that most teams, as of right now, have chose to double-team Trayce Jackson Davis as well.
Exactly
Indiana's
right.
not a great three-point shooting team, have not been a good three-point shooting team for quite some time now, but they've continued to bring in more shooters to fill around Trayce Jackson-Davis. It's going to be interesting to see what the Hoosiers do once Trayce Jackson-Davis leaves. Another big thing that he's worked on and that's been incredibly deadly for him every single season is that right shoulder turn. How deadly is that? How can teams stop it?
Well, it's extremely deadly. I mean, it's his go-to move. You take a look back at his high school highlights, he has the same move that he uses now, and he torches some of the best big men in the country with that move. And why is it so successful? Well, it's so quick. I mean, just watching it, he's quicker than a lot of the guards that he's going up against. Even at the college level, that's the case sometimes. He has so much speed, and he works on that. He's perfected that move to the point to where he does it, and he's almost unconsciously doing it. It's muscle memory, basically. You know, he's so quick whenever he does it, and, you know, he's added a whole lot of muscle. We'll get to that here in just a little bit, but that just helps him attack the basket even more. It's just another reason why he's so successful is that he has that move on lockdown, and I'm surprised defenders haven't gone to the bottom side and tried to force him back middle. Defenders keep going to the top side and leaving, or playing in the middle, and leaving that available to him, which is why Trayce Jackson-Davis is so successful. You take that away, Trayce Jackson-Davis has to go into the middle of the floor with more help, but then he still has the ability to kick it out to shooters.
And again, like you said, one of the biggest reasons that he's been so dominant is the amount of muscle that he's put on. I mean, you look at a picture from his freshman year compared to this year, he's really put on a lot of muscle, and he's been able to back down some of the best bigs that the NCAA has to offer. And who do we have to credit for that?
Cliff Marshall, Coach Cliff Marshall, strength and conditioning coach for Indiana basketball. Absolutely fantastic coach. I mean, you've seen some of the people that he's worked with. You know, Race Thompson had a crazy transformation a couple of years ago. And, I mean, Trayce Jackson-Davis is no exception. Again, take a look back at his highlights. With Center Grove, he's a lot slimmer than he was now. Now you see him, he's very muscular, he's very strong, and he's even more athletic than he was in high school. And you have to credit Cliff Marshall with that. He's made Trayce Jackson-Davis even more explosive than he was in high school, which is really saying something.
This is the final year for Trayce Jackson-Davis with the Indiana Hoosiers. And Hoosier fans really have been wondering that after every single year. His freshman year, they were wondering if he was going to go on ahead and go to the NBA. Sophomore, junior, now senior year, and he's made it abundantly clear that this is his last season with the Hoosiers, which is good for him and his future. He's really been able to build a legacy for him, but he wants to do something special with the Hoosiers. But he really hasn't been able to play a game since the Xavier game where he's been 100% healthy, and it's really had to do with that hand-related injury that has been bugging him. But he's played very well against big-time opponents.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, you heard him say it in the press conference right before North Carolina. He lives for those big-time games. You know, he gets the adrenaline going. He's going to go out and do what he loves to do, which is play the game of basketball. And he does it at such a high level all the time. You know, those are the games that he lives for. And, I mean, it's no surprise he's such a big competitor. I mean, it really shouldn't be any surprise that he plays so well in those games. But even in the games that, you know, don't mean so much, you know, you take a look at, I believe it was Marshall last season when he dropped 43 points and an Assembly Hall record, 43 points. I mean, you know, Trayce Jackson-Davis is always looking to make something special happen. And, I mean, you never know when it's going to happen. Whenever it does, it's quite a sight to see.
Had 30 points against North Carolina, and then he played, 30 points against Xavier, and then played very well against North Carolina. Was a very good addition to that team. But it's crazy to say, but Trayce Jackson-Davis, against these big-time opponents that are coming up for Indiana. They're playing Nebraska on Wednesday, their second Big Ten game of the year. And then they got Arizona and Vegas this weekend. And then next weekend, they're in Kansas to play the Jayhawks. What does Trayce Jackson-Davis need to do in those couple games coming up?
Well, I don't think he really has to do anything too special. I think he just has to play his game. You know, they're going to send two guys at least towards him whenever he gets the ball in the post. You got to trust your guys on the perimeter. I mean, we saw Miller Cobb go off for 5 threes against Rutgers just the other day. Xavier Johnson has gotten hot this season. You know, take a look at the Xavier game. He was hot. Jalen Hood-Schifino started out against North Carolina. He started out hot. You got shooters on the perimeter who you can trust. Tamar Bates dropped 22 points off the bench against Jackson State. You have a wide array of guys on the perimeter who you can pass the ball to and that they have to commit to. And maybe a pass fake here or there, you get the defense to jump on that, and then you're one-on-one in the post. I mean, it's stuff that Trayce Jackson-Davis goes through every single day. I don't think he really has to do a whole lot of special things, different things that he hasn't done all year long. I think he just has to play his game, and the game will come to him.
And the NBA draft only months away, and Trayce Jackson-Davis, according to some outlets, for Bleacher Report, is projected to go 53rd to the Los Angeles Clippers. Other teams have him going from any other range of picks. But what improvements need to be made to Trayce Jackson-Davis's game in just a short amount of time before he hopefully is drafted here soon enough?
Well, you talk about the variety of outlets where they have him going, they have him as high as 33rd or as low as 85th. So teams don't have a whole lot of confidence in where Trayce Jackson-Davis could end up in terms of his ceiling and his floor. But if TJD wants to boost his draft stock, he must expand his game outside of the paint. There's other things that he can do. He'll have to have speed, he'll have to guard on the perimeter, work on his agility, because he will be an undersized big. But he'll have to expand his game outside of the paint, because the NBA has gone to where you have stretch forwards now who are above 7 feet. You take a look at Kristaps Porzingis, a guy like Joel Embiid, where they step on beyond the perimeter and they fire from outside. They do it at a consistent rate. Trayce Jackson-Davis has not proven that yet. And I don't think Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to prove that this season. He'll have to do it in his offseason workouts.
And some players in past drafts have really risen their name through March Madness, playing very well. We saw this in 2021 with Baylor's Davion Mitchell, played very well in March Madness and ended up, of course, winning the title. Here in Indianapolis, what does Trayce Jackson-Davis need to do with the Indiana Hoosiers come March? Because this Indiana team has something special.
Well, he's going to have to take him on a ride, that's for sure. He's going to have to take him deep into the tournament. That's how guys get a lot of notoriety whenever it comes to the NBA draft. Now you have hundreds of teams playing at the same time, but when you're down to the final 16, 8, 4, 2 teams in the tournament, all eyes are on you. All the scouts are going to be looking at you. Yes, there was all 30 NBA scouts at the Indiana-Carolina game, but I'm talking all eyes. All NBA scouts have their eyes on that game or on those collective bit of games. So you have to take your team far into the tournament. Now, in terms of what is game, I don't think that there's really a whole lot he can do if he wants to be successful and raise his draft stock. I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword there. You take a look at Trayce Jackson-Davis. If he expands his game, maybe the team's not as successful. But if the team's successful, he doesn't expand his game. So it's going to be it's a bit of a tough situation for Trayce Jackson-Davis, but I'm sure he'll figure it out and he'll go the route that he believes is best for him.
And as we do in every Next Gen segment, we are going to give our NBA comparisons to Trayce Jackson-Davis. Cruz, we'll start off with you, past or present. Who reminds you of Trayce Jackson-Davis?
Well, I did a little digging, and at first I thought Noah Vonleh, and then, I realized I was young when I watched Noah Vonleh, so I didn't really remember a whole lot of his game. I went back and watched his highlights, and I was like, maybe not. I found a guy, though, who I think is very eerily similar, and it was almost crazy whenever I was watching it, just how similar their games actually are. James Worthy in the half court. Okay. Not in transition. James Worthy in transition, he's a really flashy dunker because of the way that the Los Angeles Lakers and the Showtime Lakers played, where they scored a lot in transition. Trayce Jackson-Davis is not that way. However, in the half court, James Worthy has that shoulder spin. Now, given he was right-handed, so he was on left shoulder spin. But you just flip it, it's the exact same move. They're both the same height. They have the same fundamental game. And if you go and watch those highlights, they are eerily similar, and I think you'll see a lot of comparisons.
You're going to go historical, so I'm going to stay here in the present. I'm going to pick Domantas Sabonis. Played for Gonzaga, was very good with the Zags, averaged just about 18 points in his final season with Gonzaga, and he very much reminds me of Trayce Jackson-Davis. Not as much of a shooter. Sabonis has really started to add that to his game slowly but surely. We definitely saw that with Indiana, not as much right now with Sacramento, but that right shoulder turn for Domantas Sabonis is deadly, just like Trayce Jackson-Davis. And he's athletic, he's dominant in the post. He reminds me of TJD. Is his ceiling as high as Domantas Sabonis? Only time will tell, and we're going to see where Trayce Jackson-Davis ends out things. And that's going to do it for this week's edition of Next Gen. Thank you so much to our analyst, Cruz Martin, for joining the show. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Smith, signing off. So long, everybody.